5 seconds. 4, 3.
Good evening. I'd like to welcome you to our forum for the 5th District candidates for the Maryland Legislature. Thank you so much for all the candidates for coming and spending the evening and sharing their thoughts. I'm Claudia Lewis. I'm the president of the Carroll County League of Women Voters. We've had a lot of forums. We've gotten a lot of good information out to the community, and I'm really pleased with the way they've gone, and I think tonight's will be an addition that will be very good. The League of Women Voters began in 1920, just about the time that the women got the right to vote, and we have a mission of increasing voter participation and increasing awareness on issues that are public policy. And the way that they do that is that they present a problem that seems to be in the community. They study it from all sides. They have expert witnesses come in, they have expert papers that are digested, and then an advocacy grouping will emerge from that, from a consensus building process. So if, as a private citizen, I could express my opinions, but as a league member, if I want to advocate for something, I can only express those sentiments that have been reached by consensus by the entire league. So it's a long process and it takes us a while, but I think it's a good process and I'm proud to be part of it. Mr. Steve Johnson is going to be our moderator this evening, and Steve will be introducing the rules for the forum and then introducing the candidates. Each of the candidates then will introduce themselves and tell you why they are running. So look forward to having a good evening. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and it's certainly a pleasure and an honor to serve as the moderator for this event, and I want to thank the League of Women Voters for the invitation to do so. It's certainly an important forum, and I certainly appreciate the candidates for coming out tonight. Here are the rules for tonight's forum. Each candidate will have 3 minutes for an opening statement. Following the introductions, I will ask the first question. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer the question. All candidates will answer the identical question. There will be no debate. This is an informational forum. At the conclusion of the question period and before the ending of the forum for the evening, each candidate will have 3 minutes for a summary statement. The League of Women Voters will be timing the responses and will use cue cards and a bell to signal the remaining time. The timekeeper shall ring a bell 2 to 3 seconds after the final stop signal is given, and at that time, I will open the trapdoor and the candidate will need to discontinue the answer. The questions will be selected from those submitted in advance to the Carroll County Times, the Community Media Center, the local league members, and from tonight's live audience. In addition, viewers of our live streaming program can submit questions during tonight's broadcast via Twitter at #Carroll2014. Tonight's forum is being recorded, so we ask that everyone turn their cell phones off and that attendees refrain from applause or making noise during the forum or doing anything visible or audible to express support or opposition to any candidate during the forum. So let's begin. We have opening statements, and we'll start immediately to my right with Ms. Dorothy G. Scanlan.
Thank you, Steve. Good evening. I'm Dorothy Scanlan, and I'm proud to be the Democratic candidate for the House of Delegates, District 5. Yes, Carroll County has a Republican majority. However, that gap is narrowing. I am running for office so that all of the citizens of Carroll County will have a voice in Annapolis, not just some. I was born in Baltimore and spent my early childhood years there, but I've lived in Carroll County for 45 years. I stayed in Carroll County to raise my sons because Carroll's quality of life and outstanding public education make it an ideal place to raise a family. I am married to a Carroll County public school teacher, and I'm blessed to have 2 responsible and compassionate sons who both went through Carroll County Public Schools. CCPS did a wonderful job preparing my sons for college. My older son graduated from Salisbury University with a dual degrees in theater and music. My younger son is in his final semester at College Park. He's going to major in English, and he's graduating 2 weeks from today, yay. My professional journey has been eclectic and not typical of that of a career politician. And this is something that I think makes me uniquely qualified to represent our diversity of citizens. My bachelor's degree is in business with a concentration in accounting. I started my professional life in the corporate world. Since then, I have been a full-time mother, a writer-editor, and teacher-librarian. My master's degree, which I obtained from McDaniel College, is in school librarianship. Currently, I have my own small business, and I am the volunteer coordinator for Common Ground on the Hill. I've also continued my association with Carroll County Public Schools, working as a substitute teacher. My creative outlet is performing Irish music with a local band. We are regulars at the Maryland Renaissance Festival. Volunteer work has always been very important to me. I serve on the Carroll County Democratic Central Committee. I volunteer locally, and I have also volunteered for national and even international nonprofits. Thank you all for coming. I'm really excited to be here.
Thank you, Mrs. Scanlan. Next, we have Ms. Carmen Amedori.
Thank you. My name is Carmen Amedori, and I am the conservative Republican candidate for Carroll County House of Delegates. Now, I've lived in the county for 34 years. I was elected, represented Carroll County for 2 terms. In 2004, Bob Ehrlich appointed me to the Maryland Parole Commission. I was at a women's Republican Club meeting this week, and Susan Krebs talked about how she was actively soliciting Democrat supporters to switch to the Republican Party to run, so they could vote for her to bring her out of this primary. And I started to ask myself why she would do that. Maybe it was the journalist in me that kicked in at that point, that I picked up on that statement that she made. So I went back and I started going through her financials. She has $73,000 on balance. $73,000. So I started going through her PAC money, her PAC and her union money that she's getting, and I realized that perhaps she's getting all this PAC and union money because she voted for Obamacare, House Bill 166 in 2011, which is the enabling legislation for the website that is now costing us more than $100 million. We have union PAC money coming into this county. We have union PAC money coming in via candidates like Susan Krebs. And I think it's very important that the Republicans and the conservatives in this county take note that your delegate who feels that she has a conservative voting record finds it necessary to tap into her Democrat supporters to pull her out of a Republican primary. And I think it's very important that we take note that we do not want union PAC money coming into our races. I don't think we're going to want union leaders telling us that we can't have a Second Amendment sanctuary county. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Mr. Donald B. Elliott.
My friends, I'm Delegate Don Elliott, a member of the House of Delegates since 1987. I'm a graduate of the University of Maryland School of Pharmacy. For many years, I was a small business owner of the New Windsor and Union Bridge pharmacies. I'm retired United States Navy, having served 20 years, active and reserve, retiring as Lieutenant Commander. I was married 44 years. My wife, Jeannie, died 5 years ago. I have 3 sons, Chris, Doug, and Greg. The question I see it in respect to my candidacy: have I represented the best interests of the people whom I serve? The difference I have, apart from many of my opponents, is that I have a legislative record. I believe that record will demonstrate that my positions on the issues coincides with the people of Carroll County. The record will show me to be conservative an advocate of regulatory reform and enhanced tax relief. I have also been supportive of many legislative initiatives to encourage a more business-friendly environment in Maryland. In recognition of this achievement, Maryland Business for Responsive Government has awarded me the John Shaw Award. And I just learned that for the past session, I got a 100%, and a cumulative over the years that I've been in the legislature. My average for business is 84% cumulative. I played an active role in promoting efforts to preserve agriculture, agribusiness, and the family farm. My voting record will show me to be consistently pro-life and pro-Second Amendment. I hope to continue as your conservative voice in Annapolis. Your vote for me in the Republican primary on June 24th would be most appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Mrs. Susan Krebs.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Delegate Susan Krebs. It's been an absolute pleasure and a privilege to serve Carroll County in the Maryland House of Delegates. My husband Mark and I are proud to call Carroll County our home for the last 29 years. We raised our 3 children in Eldersburg, and all have graduated from Carroll County Public Schools and are gainfully employed college graduates. With over 20 years' experience in accounting and finance, working in both large and small business, I'm one of the few legislators in Annapolis who have actual business experience. My experience in the business world enables me to look at the issues from the perspective of how our policy decisions impact small business and job creation. However, my family and community have always been my priorities. Starting off as a PTA mom, soccer coach, and Sunday school teacher, and then serving on the school board, allowed me to work to improve our schools for our kids. I was then elected to the legislature. I've been very proud to be an active volunteer throughout Carroll County. Currently, I serve on the hospice board, the board of my church's preschool. I also serve on the Carroll Lutheran Village Advisory Board, and I serve as program director for our Lions Club. The spirit of volunteerism and community is what makes Carroll County a great place to live. I've worked hard to ensure the basic principles of limited government, personal responsibility, strong families, and local control of our schools. And I've worked to protect our freedoms and liberties as guaranteed in our Constitution, particularly with regard to our Second Amendment rights. I have a proven track record of working across the aisle to get things done without compromising my conservative principles. This year, we had success in eliminating the rain tax for Carroll County and reducing the Maryland estate tax. I also had success in passing legislation to make government more transparent and more options to bring health care providers into Maryland. Recently, I was awarded the Legislative Champion Award from the American Association of Naturopathic Physicians for my successful efforts in passing legislation to license naturopathic doctors, working collaboratively with 2 Baltimore City legislators. My 3 priorities, reining in state spending and reversing the tide of tax increases imposed on our working families. I have voted against every O'Malley tax and fee increase and against his growing budgets, and I've worked to offer solutions. I believe this approach will stimulate our economy and create jobs. I will continue to work to get Obamacare replaced with real health care reform. I initiated the first hearings on the botched rollout of the Maryland Health Exchange, and then I was appointed to serve on the Oversight Committee. My assignment on the Health and Government Operations Committee has given me the expertise and the platform to offer credible solutions to our health care needs. I will continue to work to reverse the trend of the welfare and the nanny state here in Maryland by working on tax and spending policies and priorities that encourage work, marriage, and personal responsibility. My voting record and record of working in our community to solve problems is ample evidence of why I believe I'm the best qualified to address these issues. I'm a common-sense conservative legislator, and I'm confident that with new leadership in the governor's office, we can bring fiscal stability to Maryland.
Thank you, Mrs. Krebs.
Thank you.
Next, we'll hear from Mr. Justin Reedy.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Justin Reedy, currently serving in my first term as state delegate. I want to thank the organizers of tonight's event, and I really appreciate all of you who've taken the time to attend and those watching. It's been a real honor and privilege to serve as one of your state delegates here in Carroll County. When I ran in 2010 as a self-employed small business owner, it was because, like so many people that are here, I was really troubled by what decades of one-party liberal rule had done to our state. I believed then and I believe now that Carroll County needs energetic, conservative, and positive leaders to advocate for us in Annapolis, and also to be actively listening to our constituents back here at home. I promised to oppose tax and fee increases, work to eliminate wasteful spending, protect our constitutional rights, including our Second Amendment rights, and be available, open, and honest with constituents. And I'm proud to say that I've kept those promises to the best of my ability. In my short time in Annapolis, I've never voted for a single tax increase. I helped lead the floor fight and the committee fight against Governor O'Malley's anti-gun legislation, SB 281, in 2013. I have a 100% pro-small business voting record, a 100% pro-life voting record. I've also stood up for local control for our schools by filing legislation to get our state out of Common Core and stop further implementation. And I've tried to be really diligent to watch out for other state mandates that add cost without adding quality to our education system. But I haven't only said no. I've worked with Republicans and Democrats to put forward real free market alternatives to the problems that our state faces. My focus has really been on enacting conservative reforms like eliminating unneeded regulations and restrictions on small business, improving transparency in how the government spends our tax dollars, and other types of reform that I hope make it easier for businesses to compete here in our state and for families to stay here. A lot has changed in my family in the last 4 years. I say long-suffering bride, Ruth, who our families it takes a toll on our families when we serve, and she has always been there by my side. We welcomed our daughter, Brooklyn, into the world 2 years ago, and of course our lives changed big time, but obviously for the better, although I think my parents are more excited, we're as excited as we were to be grandparents for the first time. One thing that hasn't changed is my commitment to making our state and our county a place where families and retirees can afford to live and businesses can create jobs and thrive. But I recognize that there's so much more that needs to be done. And I'm glad I get the chance to be here tonight to ask for your vote in the June 24th Republican primary so that I can continue working for our community. I look forward to answering questions and exchanging ideas. And the last thing I'll say just in closing is I actually enjoy when someone doesn't agree with me. I like to talk to them about why they don't agree and talk about the issue. So even afterwards, I'd love to talk to you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Our next candidate is Mr. Haven Shoemaker.
Hi, I'm Haven Shoemaker. I practice law up in Hampstead, and I was the former mayor there, and presently I serve as county commissioner for District 2. In both those jobs, though, I've seen that a lot of bad stuff rolls downhill from Annapolis, and that's why I'm seeking a position in the Maryland House of Delegates. First of all, though, I want to thank the League of Women Voters and the CMC and WTTR and the Times for sponsoring this forum, and it certainly is an honor and a privilege for me to be here with all you all this evening. Ronald Reagan said that for Republicans, every day is the 4th of July, and for Democrats, every day is April 15th. Nowhere have we seen more evidence of that than in Martin O'Malley's Maryland. In the last 7 years, we've seen 40-some taxes and fees hiked by Annapolis. Heck, they're even taxing the rain down there. As a consequence, Maryland is at a competitive disadvantage with other states, and people and businesses are fleeing across the state line in droves. We've lost 31,000 taxpayers to other states and 6,500 businesses. A recent Gallup poll suggests that 47% of Marylanders would move if they could. I believe we can do better. I believe I bring a different kind of record to the table. As mayor of Hampstead, I presided over a town that has one of the lowest tax rates in the state. As a county commissioner, I've now voted to cut taxes 4 years in a row. We've cut the property tax rate 3 times, the business tax rate, and the piggyback income tax rate. In property taxes alone, I've supported over $22 million in cuts. We've also reduced debt at the county level and have streamlined government. And as a consequence, Carroll County is experiencing an uptick in economic development activity. I think it's time we sent someone to Annapolis who actually has a record that matches his rhetoric. I think we need to get this state off our backs and out of our wallets. Humbly, I ask that you join the Fraternal Order of Police, who've endorsed my candidacy and that you cast your vote for me on June 24th. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Mr. Joshua Stonko.
I want to thank the League of Women Voters, Carroll County Times, WTTR, and the Carroll Media Center for hosting us tonight. My name is Joshua Stonko, and I'm running for the House of Delegates because District 5 needs a delegate that is focused on putting Carroll County first. For the last 4 years, our incumbents have voted for legislation that pushes aside the best interests of Carroll County. The most alarming vote taken by our House delegation members was their vote for House Bill 166 in 2011. This is the initial Obamacare bill that resulted in the ill-fated Maryland Health Exchange website that wasted $150 million taxpayer dollars. Not only did they vote for Obamacare, but they did this while taking thousands in campaign contributions from the medical and insurance lobbies. Many of us know that the delegation have claimed victory over the rain tax because of a meeting that was facilitated between the Maryland Department of Environment and our county commissioners that resulted in protection for the rain tax in the short term. But this only tells half the story. When they were given the opportunity to vote to protect our county long-term from legal action that could result in implementation of the rain tax, they stood against it. Unlike the incumbent delegates, I will stand up strong against the Annapolis establishment and work relentlessly to protect Carroll County residents from the implementation of the rain tax in the long term. The rain tax and Obamacare were not the first time that our House delegation failed to protect and advocate for county residents. Our House delegation failed to protect hold harmless education funding that was much needed for our schools. Our House delegation members, aside from Delegate Elliott, even voted against $2 million for New Windsor to pay for the New Windsor water treatment plant. Without these $2 million, the delegates voted against, the residents of New Windsor would have seen their water and sewage rates tripled. Instead of sending your hard-earned tax dollars to other parts of the state, our delegation needs a leader that will fight for the residents of our county and bring your hard-earned tax dollars back to Carroll County. I will vote to protect our small business owners, farmers, students, and families with common sense conservative votes in the House of Delegates. Words are cheap and action matters. Annapolis needs a new voice. As your delegate, I will always put Carroll County first. I ask for your vote in the June 24th primary, and thank you all for coming here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. And last but not least, Mr. Kevin Arutz.
And I thank you and good evening. I want to thank all who have arranged for this forum, Carroll County League of Women Voters, Carroll County Times, WTTR, and CMC, and the facility we're in, Carroll Community College. My name is Kevin Utz. I am running for the District 5 House of Delegates seat in Carroll County and ask for your vote on June 24th. I am a Republican and proud of it. I have a very long history of public service from the age of 18 when I became a volunteer at the Westminster Fire Department. And from that point, out of high school, I joined the Maryland State Police as a police dispatcher. From that point, I went to the police academy and became a Maryland State Trooper, and after 28 years, I retired. Because the state police frowned upon troopers running for public office, I didn't get a chance to do it until I retired. And when I did, I ran for council in the city of Westminster and won on my first go-around. I was a councilman for 4 years and then ran for mayor and won on the first term, and I am now in my second term as mayor. Running a small city is not easy, and I don't disagree with what I've heard from Haven and from Josh, that the state of Maryland is depleting our funds locally in a huge way. They are depleting it by regulation and all the things that they bring down for the locals to have to take care of, including the pension of the teachers and funding school projects. I continue to serve in all kinds of volunteer capacities. I'm currently a realtor in town, and our business donates to many charities that we have supported over the past. They too are hurting for funds, and we need to also understand their need. My desire to hold this position is to continue my dedicated service, but represent our county in Annapolis. I believe my service in this position to be responsible directly to my citizens and not to PACs. PACs, what are they? They're political action committees that donate money to prospective candidates, and they fill their chest full of money. My campaign will not receive any PAC money. I won't be hand-tied to those who will potentially determine what vote I will take in Annapolis. I know that we have had some pretty harsh words on the floor of this forum already. I won't go into them, but I don't disagree. Our current legislative body has gone to Annapolis and voted against school funding that should have come here. And there are many others.
Thank you, Mr. Utz. I think our bell broke.
Gives me a chance to relook.
We'll now begin the questions, and every candidate will have a chance to go first with the questions. And the first question will start with Mr. Reedy. And this question was submitted by a member of the audience. If elected, what would you do to improve the image of Carroll County in the state legislature and bring more of our tax dollars home?
It's a good question. I think part of the thing that we have to do is something that I think we've tried to do is tell our story personally to the other legislators that we come in contact with. You know, a lot of times the partisan rhetoric can be pretty hot, and we do have some really stark disagreements with members of the majority party. They don't represent, I think, the values that will make our entire state strong. But at the same time, there's a lot of common ground too, and we'd like to try to show them, and we've been working on this, trying to show them that when we have problems in our county, we work collaboratively to solve them with nonprofit agencies, with county government, with state government. You know, we just have to continue to tell our story and work within the process to get those kind of things done. You know, it's a challenge because people in Carroll County, I don't believe, want me to vote for raiding teacher pension funds or funding Obamacare or funding Common Core. And all of those things would be something I would have voted for had I voted for this last state budget. So, you know, it's a challenge because I understand that the attacks that are being made are, you know, everybody's voting record is fair game. I've always believed that. But I think it's important, I do think it's important not to impugn motives, though. And I'm proud of my voting record, and I'm proud of being able to work for the citizens of Carroll County. And I actually think we've made some progress in building relationships. And I think things like the estate tax and us being able to, passing and us being able to exempt Carroll County from the rain tax because we sat down and talked with the chair of the committee of jurisdiction and MDE, we were able to sit down and really hash out what we were already doing in our county. And they were surprised and pleased with what we've done with stormwater management, thanks to our commissioners. So, you know, it's about having those conversations and working together. But I can't sell out principles that I know Carroll County voters wouldn't want me to sell out because of, you know, $1 million of funding here or there when we're robbing $200 million from our teacher pensions. So, thank you. Thanks for the question.
Thank you. Mr. Shoemaker.
I think Delegate Reedy's spot on. We have to be able to reach across the aisle and work collaboratively with the majority party when it's possible to do so without abandoning our conservative principles. There's no question about it. Of course, we also have to recognize that, you know, they are the majority party, at least for now and probably the foreseeable future. I think with my experience in both town government in Hampstead and certainly as county commissioner, I have been able to forge a consensus to get things done that needed to be done at both levels of government. And that's certainly what needs to happen in Annapolis. I mean, I believe that we need to be more productive for the folks here in Carroll County.
Thank you. Mr. Stonko.
We can help our county. We can. Besides our House delegation, there has been many things in our, by our delegation, our Senate delegation, that have been good for our county. Much of the problem is that our House delegation will vote against any measure that they feel will look bad to them for primary voters. The Senate delegation has been successful in many of the things they've tried to do for Carroll County. For nonprofits, they've gotten the Carroll County nonprofit gaming bill through many times, and it's been killed in the House several times. For education, we had a chance for hold harmless education funding of $1 million over 2 years and $5 million over 3 years to bring to Carroll County that our Senate delegation was able to move into the Senate budget, but our House delegation refused to protect. The rain tax, the Senate delegation was able to put into the budget an opportunity for us to be out of the rain tax forever and to protect us from lawsuits from outside organizations that feel that we should be paying the rain tax. The opportunity to bring Carroll County to the forefront of the state of Maryland is there, but we need leaders in the House of Delegates that are going to stand up for our residents. I promise to do that, and I will continue to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Utz?
There's no doubt that when there's a leader among a team of people, that leader must communicate with all parties involved. And we all know in Carroll County that we are the Republican county, but in Annapolis, it is different. We do have to walk across the aisle in order to get any or all legislation in our favor to pass. We have no choice. It is a known fact that there can be bipartisan work among all legislators in Annapolis to make things happen. I look forward to representing our county and hoping that they will allow me to work across the aisle and with our constituents within the Republican Party. Thanks.
Thank you. Mrs. Scanlan?
This issue is essentially why I'm running for office. It's time to send a Democrat to Annapolis to work with whoever the two Republican colleagues that I would be serving with. Carroll County simply lacks respect in Annapolis because our delegation there is the party of no. We need people who know the value of compromise. We need people who are going to reach across the aisle. And this is exactly what I want to do when I go to Annapolis. As Mr. Stonko said, the casino bill is a perfect example of the dysfunction in Annapolis. There is absolutely no reason why this bill has not been passed. But it's because, unfortunately, our delegation lacks respect in Annapolis. The same with the education funding, the extra that could have been added onto the budget, had they voted for it. Our schools, whose budget has been whittled away at for the past few years, they could have gotten an extra $1.1 million this year had the budget been voted on. But instead, they chose to play the blame game with each other. You know, it was this person's fault. No, it was this person's fault that it didn't happen. I want to change that. I want to bring respect to Annapolis. I want to reach across the aisle to my Republican colleagues, and I think working together, we can kind of bring a new era to Carroll County. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Amedori?
I'm going to ask if you can repeat the question for the audience, because I've kind of forgotten what it was.
I'd be
Maybe
happy
they have
to.
too.
If elected, what would you do to improve the image of Carroll County in the state legislature and bring more of our tax dollars home?
Thank you. I was elected, and I served 6 years in the General Assembly, and there was a lot of respect from the Democrats for the Carroll County delegation at the time. I sponsored primary sponsor of numerous legislation with bipartisan support. And it wasn't just a matter of getting the Democrats to sign on to my legislation, but they were honored and flattered that I even asked that they would. So it's a matter of gaining that respect. It's a matter of not voting against the budget. You cannot vote against a budget simply because there's all kinds of reasons not to vote against it, obviously. And I'm sure that I have voted against it in previous years. But, you know, when you're looking at important factors like language in the budget that protects Carroll County from lawsuits because the rain tax is not imposed and they don't vote for that budget, there's no protection in Carroll County. There may have been a meeting facilitated by our delegation, but it was our local elected officials who got it done with MDE, with the Memorandum of Understanding. But it was the Senate who got the language in the budget that protects Carroll County from lawsuits. And without voting for that budget, your House delegation said, I don't care if you have to have a lawsuit. So there are many reasons not to vote for the budget, but there are some really good reasons to vote for it. And I know from being down in Annapolis before that it's a matter of respect for the Democrats as well as being able to communicate with the leadership. And if you can't communicate with the leadership, you're not going to get a gaming bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Elliott.
In 2010, I was the first recipient of the Charles McMathias Jr. Award. It was given by the House of Delegates. And this was given to the Republican who had done the most to work across party lines for the benefit of all Marylanders. And there was a recipient also on the Democrat side. But this was the first award, and I want you to understand that if personal relationships are so important in this regard, and one does not have to compromise your conservative values to achieve accomplishment in the General Assembly. However, you know, I work diligently with my delegation, Delegate Reedy and Delegate Krebs, Delegate Stocksdale. I work diligently with them, together with them, working working as far as for the support of certain legislation on the agenda of our commissioners. We worked hard, but you got to understand it's not as easy as my opponents would convey to you here, that all the things that they're going to change. If you say one thing, if you say that you're for a certain thing or you're a proponent of a certain thing, that's one thing. But if you say you're going to make the change, you better think twice, because when you get down there, it's a little more difficult. And I think I've tried to the best I can, as I'll just demonstrate to you or show you, that I actually got an award for having been across party lines to gain benefits for all of Marylanders. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Krebs.
Thank you. I want to tell you I make no apologies for voting against O'Malley's budget that has gone up $10 billion and 35% in his tenure. I don't know how many of you have gotten a 35% increase in the last 8 years, since you've been working. So I make no apologies for that. In that budget this year, there was no additional money in the House budget for Carroll County Public Schools. That is a fallacy that has been perpetuated by some of our senators. There was never money. We tried to amend it into the budget. It was not there, and we didn't vote for it. Also in that budget, there was a rating of our state employees' pension funds by $200 million, and we disagreed with that. We also disagreed that they took the money away from our counties and our towns for the highway user revenues. They did not put them back the way they should have. This state has been on a spending spree, and we have got a philosophical difference with our Senate colleagues, and obviously two of the people up here are siding with them. We are not going to become Democrats with their tax and spending. We are going to hold firm. We also didn't agree with them on same-sex marriage. We didn't agree with them on the bathroom bill. We didn't agree with them on the pension shift. We have a philosophical divide within our House and Senate delegation. The 4 members of the House delegation have held firm for our conservative beliefs, and we're going to continue to do that. And if you want conservative people in the House of Delegates supporting your values, the 4 of us, myself, Delegate Elliott, Delegate Stocksdale, and Delegate Reedy, that's what we went down there to do. And we're not going to be bullied by anyone to vote for a budget we think is irresponsible fiscally because of a bribe possibly $1 million that was never in a budget that we voted for. We do get along well. I've gotten money for the Henryton Center, $4 million to get taken down in my town. I've gotten money for Warfield. I've gotten road improvements on every intersection on Route 32. We work well, and we've gotten a lot accomplished I have a list of things that we've brought home for this county without jeopardizing our principles, and I don't plan to do that if I'm reelected.
Thank you. Our next question will begin with Mr. Utz. Recently, in Annapolis, marijuana was reduced as a serious crime. How do you personally feel about this decision, and what, if any, changes would you consider introducing during the next legislative session?
While marijuana use has sprung out all over the country as an okay thing to do, I can tell you personally from my experience as a Maryland State Trooper that marijuana is just the leading cause of folks to move to other harder, more devastating drugs. Not only does it affect the person who is administering its effects to themselves, but it affects families, friends, police officers who have to arrest these folks. It just is an ongoing process through the court system. One, I won't support legalizing marijuana as a okay drug just because. I will fight to support heavier penalties for marijuana use and its abuse among not only teens, but the adult population. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Scanlan.
Let me explain exactly what this new legislation says about decriminalizing marijuana. Decriminalizing it simply means that you will not have a criminal record. Instead, if you are caught with 10 grams or less of marijuana, you will first get a $100 fine. Second offense is $250, and a third offense is $500 and a court appearance. A very sensible amendment was added to this bill, which I completely support, that anyone under the age of 21 who was caught with 10 grams or less has to make a court appearance and go into a drug treatment program. As far as legalizing it, I would not promote legislation to do that. I imagine that someone will probably put legislation in to do that. If that happens, we certainly have an opportunity to see how this is working out in the states that have legalized marijuana, Colorado, Washington, Oregon. And if there was a push to legalize it here, we watch them and learn from their mistakes. As far as marijuana being a gateway drug or addictive, there's really no hard data to prove that. Other than that, I think, I support the decriminalization of marijuana. We spend millions and millions of dollars prosecuting users and chasing down dealers. I think that it's just sensible to save money and decriminalize it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Amedori.
Thank you. I would have voted against the decriminalization of marijuana. Our state's attorneys and our law enforcement came out and basically said that it would be a very difficult situation to try to prosecute because of the paraphernalia bill, the paraphernalia attachment, the penalty is still the same. So I would have voted no. I find it interesting that our delegation talks about compromising and wouldn't vote for the budget and compromise their conservative principles when they voted for Obamacare that's now costing the state $100 million plus for billboards for their campaigns. Now that's not impugning motive, that's following the money. We're looking at money, $76,000 in campaign accounts. We're looking at money from that same candidate, union PAC money coming into this county via these candidates. I urge the Republicans in this county to think about that seriously. This cannot be an election where the Democrats are coming in and voting in a Republican primary. If someone's record is as conservative as they say it is, then I ask you to ask yourself, why is it that they need to actively seek Democrats to switch to the Republican Party to vote to swing this election?
Thank you. Mr. Elliott.
I'd like to address the question, since the question I'm not sure was responded to previously. I'm opposed, of course, to decriminalization of marijuana, opposed to legalization of marijuana. To be able to obtain 10 grams and not have any particular penalty to it, what happens is you open up the street to a great number of younger people that'll have access to this 10 grams. I have real problems with that. I knew of a young person who I witnessed having diminished memory after a period of time and was a marijuana addict. I say that, but yet there are some medical uses of marijuana that are very important, and I have supported that legislation in the past. And so I have voted on a number of pieces of legislation for that, including this year, and I'm hopeful that we can utilize marijuana in a very controlled way to assist people that have conditions such as seizures and things of that nature. As far as marijuana itself is concerned, state police will tell you, they told us in Frederick, that and every time they've interviewed a heroin addict, they said that their entry-level drug was marijuana. Every instance, they said. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Krebs.
Thank you. I would absolutely vote no to legalizing marijuana. I voted no to decriminalizing marijuana for many of the reasons that were just stated. Three of us serve on the Health and Government Operations Committee, and that's where a lot of these issues come. And we did pass a medical marijuana bill this year because we were shown that there are definitely some medical reasons for epileptic children and some other things. And in a very controlled environment, we believe that medical marijuana, if done properly, has some medicinal value. So we supported that. I've been involved for years with our youth, and it is a gateway drug. There are many, many, many studies that show that marijuana is a gateway drug. That's indisputable. I worked on the Not My Kid program for a decade with our Carroll County Public Schools, and it's very difficult for me to say that this is okay for our youth, because it is not okay. The bill was also very poorly written. It was hastily put through on a Saturday morning. It was supposed to be a task force, and the next thing you know, we had the Black Caucus come up, and they jammed this thing through because they thought it was unfair to the folks in their areas, and it's going to be very, very difficult to enforce. So other than the fact that I'm opposed to it philosophically, the bill is a train wreck the way it was written and the way it was jammed through, so I opposed it.
Thank you. Mr. Reedy?
Yes, thank you. As has been stated, I think there are some great medical uses for marijuana. What they do with most of these strains of medical marijuana is they take the THC out of it in some fashion, and I've supported that really since I ran. I was asked that when I ran in 2010. I do support, prescribed by a doctor, controlled environment. I think the issue, there's two things I think about when we talk about the legalization of marijuana. One is when you legalize something, you tell somebody it's okay to do it. And my problem with legalizing marijuana ultimately is I think the last thing we need in today's society is more people my age and younger tuning out, being disconnected from what's going on around them. We have enough problem with people texting and driving and tweeting and driving and Facebooking and driving. We have people who get addicted to media, get addicted to alcohol, get addicted to drugs. I don't think legalizing would send it the right message. I think that would be a problem for me morally. I understand the argument, and in fact, I was somewhat undecided. I'll be very honest with the people watching, somewhat undecided on the decriminalization. Earlier in session, I was looking at some of the proposals, and some of the arguments there do make sense. That rather than having somebody have a criminal record for being caught with a joint, they would be fined. But ultimately, when this came out suddenly, there were a lot of loopholes. They weren't willing to really address kids that were underage in any meaningful way using it, other than there was a good amendment on that Ms. Scanlan mentioned. But I ended up voting against it, and I don't believe legalizing is the right way to go with marijuana. But I think you always have to be reasoned. The last thing I'll say is I also think it's a little bit interesting that there's so much media attention focused on something like this when I really believe that jobs, taxes, and the economy are things that really matter most to Marylanders. And it would be good to see us spending more time on that and maybe less time on some of these issues, even though I know there's a lot of interest, and I certainly respect the question. But I really hope that in the future sessions we'll spend a little less time on that and more time on making Maryland more livable for families.
Thank you. Mr. Shoemaker.
I certainly opposed decriminalization of marijuana, and I also strongly oppose legalizing it. It is a proven fact that it is a gateway drug. There are studies that support that notion, and frankly, as an attorney, I've handled a lot of marijuana cases, and inevitably, they would be back in a few years being charged with possessing some other type of CDS that was a heck of a lot stronger. So, I strongly believe it's a gateway drug. Now, I can't understand, though, why there was this rush to pass this legislation? Why not wait and see what happens in the states that legalized marijuana, like Colorado, for instance? Why not let Colorado be the guinea pig, see how that works out before Maryland took up the issue? I think it was probably election year politics that reared its ugly head.
Thank you. And Mr. Stonko.
My tough stance on illegal drugs is one of the reasons that I was endorsed by the Carroll County Fraternal Order of Police and the Maryland State Fraternal Order of Police. The bill that passed this year was for decriminalization, not for legalization. I will not support legalization and would have not supported the decriminalization this past year. Marijuana threatens our youth, as previously stated, and it also threatens the safety of our first responders. Recently, there was a study that came out that showed marijuana use doubles the chance of a highway car accident, and as well as many studies that have shown that it can be a gateway drug for worse types of drugs. So, I've stood strong in my stance against marijuana since I started this campaign last year. I will always always advocate for safety first, and like stated, we have a guinea pig state in Washington and Colorado going through this now. More studies will be done over the next couple of years, and we'll be able to learn more. So yeah, I would have voted against decriminalization, and I will continue to not support legalization. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question was a submission from before the forum and also from several of our studio audience members, and it has to do with education. And we'll start with Mrs. Amedori with this question. Okay. In 2010, the state of Maryland entered into the Race to the Top grant, which includes, among other things, the adoption of the Common Core state standards and new systems for evaluating teachers and principals. What are your concerns with this program, and how would you introduce potential changes in Annapolis if you have concerns?
I do have concerns of Common Core. Common Core is the overreach and the long arm of the federal government coming in and establishing standards for children to learn by. This is not good. It's as bad as union PAC money coming into Carroll County via our candidates. Because once we start getting unions into this county, we're going to have more than just Common Core in our schools. Common Core is, a situation where everybody is eventually going to be learning at the same pace, on the same page, on the same day, at the same time, the same hour. And that doesn't come from me. That comes from teachers that wrote columns for the Washington Post. Teachers don't like it. Parents don't like it. Children sit home and cry because they can't figure out their homework. Parents can't help them because they can't understand it. And so it's going to be greater than a divide between parents and teachers and students. It's going to be a situation where there are going to be no teachers. Our students are going to be looking at computers. They'll probably have a face read, a biotech situation where, the eyeball will be red. And don't think this can't happen. It's happening. We have biotech equipment in our schools that our delegation wouldn't help to pass a bill to stop it in our schools. This is happening, folks. We are Carroll County. We don't need union PAC money coming in and leading these campaigns so that our candidates can have big billboards on Route 140.
Thank you. Mr. Elliott?
I'm very much opposed to Common Core. Included within the Common Core is a database on each child that is very problematic. It appears that everywhere we go, we've got to have a database, and these types of things are really make it problematic in respect to privacy concerns. Common Core is really a nationalized, top-down, one-size-fits-all approach to education. And I simply believe that education policy should come from local communities and from the states. I think that the governmental entities that are, and I feel that they are governmental entities that are closer to the people. For that reason, I'm very much opposed to Common Core. Furthermore, I've learned, for example, they do such ridiculous things as to try to explain to you how you're supposed to do mathematics. And if you don't do it in accordance with the way you're instructed, then you only get half credit. And that seems to me to be the most ridiculous thing ever heard of. So consequently, I just don't see that we should be moving ahead with Common Core. Now, the question was also whether what we've done about it, what we will do about it. Well, I have voted for repeal of it in the last session of General Assembly, and I also voted for delaying of certain aspects of it. So that's where I am in respect to that piece of that particular issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Krebs.
Thank you. Common Core has certainly been a topic of discussion. Having served on the school board for 4 years and dedicated a lot of my adult life to improving education in our county, it's a very important issue. The idea behind some kind of standards and accountability is something we all agree with. We're not being able to be competitive with our other nations, and this is a competitive society, global society we live in. However, Common Core has come around the wrong way, and we need to go back to our local control and our local school boards and parents and decide what it is we want in our schools. So we did sponsor legislation this year to repeal the Common Core. We sponsored legislation, co-sponsored legislation to delay the Common Core. I think you're going to see a slow down in the implementation. Some of it is already being implemented, and there's some standards are good, but the way the curriculum is being written and the way it's being driven top down is very problematic, and very problematic for our teachers who have not been adequately had an opportunity to be prepared. It came very late in the game before school started, and it's not fair to them to be. It's not fair to our students to be tested on it. It's not fair for our teachers to be maybe evaluated on it on something that is such a great change. So we need to get back to the drawing board on it, and it is up to our local school board and our state school board, and we're working with them cooperatively. But it needs to be repealed or slowed down and reevaluated because I don't think it's something that people are accepting.
Thank you. Mr. Reedy?
Yes, thank you. Common Core really has been, it's an overall sort of top-down philosophy and curriculum that comes from the federal government, and that's been laid out by some of the other folks that have answered. I think some of the ideas behind it really have been crafted by education bureaucrats and largely by people who've never spent time in a classroom teaching children. So theoretically, some people put ideas together they think will work, or you like to use new buzzwords about how you would educate children. Some of the information that they're using in curriculum, the origins are a little bit scary. I will say that. I think there's a lot of people who may have good intentions, though, that may be supporting Common Core, but they've never spent time in a classroom. This year, I co-sponsored legislation. We all did, I believe. All four of the Carroll County delegates co-sponsored legislation to get the state out of Common Core and race to the top completely. I wasn't here when the General Assembly voted to accept that race to the top money. We did have legislation that came down a couple years later to expand the longitudinal data system, which is one of the things that will track students all the way through their education life, and I voted against that. But I also was a lead sponsor on a bill to simply get us out of the science standards, which are the newest things that are coming out. And just to illustrate the arrogance that we do deal with at times, I think in the education bureaucracy nationally and even at the state level, over 80% of teachers, according to the Maryland Teachers Union's own survey, said they felt overwhelmed and ill-prepared to teach the current stuff that we're doing with Common Core, much less new standards. But their state leadership came in and opposed my bill to repeal the science standards, and the State Board of Education came and testified and said that because I simply wanted to not have the new science standards at this time, they said my bill would set back education 40 years. Maybe some of the folks on the stage should have dug that up, because that would have been a good one to hit me with too. But clearly there's a problem, and we need to get out of Common Core.
Thank you. Mr. Shoemaker.
Education's been tremendously important to me throughout my tenure as county commissioner. It's been a point of emphasis during my term, and I've fought pretty hard for adequate education funding every year. But I have a problem with Common Core insofar as it usurps local control, and that's problematic. I believe curriculum needs to be determined at the local level. I also believe that the curriculum, the standards are being implemented way too fast. You know, Commissioner Howard came up with a number of legislative ideas to either slow down or eliminate Common Core, and any one of those would have been preferable to the situation that we're currently experiencing. Unfortunately, though, what happened is the feds dangled a $250 million carrot in front of the State Board of Education, and then they swallowed that carrot. And they kept $125 million for themselves and gave a substantial portion of the other $125 million to PG, Montgomery, and Baltimore City. Meanwhile, back at the farm, Carroll County is left with implementing Common Core because of the mandate from the state. They're getting $500,000 to do so, but it's going to cost $5 million to implement. And that's the kind of stuff that I think we need to rail against. And unfortunately, you know, when Race to the Top came forward, it received almost unanimous support in both houses.
Thank you. Mr. Stonko.
Education is a serious issue for this election, and it's one of the big reasons that I got into the race. Alongside the $3.1 million that our House delegation failed to protect in the Senate budget, Common Core is the most serious issue that we're facing. I've become one of the most outspoken opponents to Common Core in our county. I've read letters to the editor since the beginning of my campaign. I've sent out mailers addressing the issue, and given speeches about the issues that it's created for our teachers and our students, along with the constitutionality issues that it creates. Race to the Top and Common Core is terrible for our education system. Aside from the issue of constitutionality, it removes much of the local control from our school boards. I've talked to teachers in our schools, traveling from different schools, from North Carroll High School to South Carroll High School, across the rest of our county, and they're struggling with the implementation and catching up with all of the work that goes along with it, along with the many issues it creates with how it instructs how they must give their lessons. I've also talked to students around our county, and they're frustrated with Common Core. When many of them were taking their PARCC test for the first time, they struggled with the different questions that were on there. They went through the curriculum, and at the end of their curriculum, they took the PARCC test again, and many of them did worse. And I think that talks to the nature of what Common Core, the issues of Common Core. Not only the standards that they create didn't work, but standards nationwide with a top-down education system are never going to work. It proved to be ineffective in No Child Left Behind, and it will prove to be ineffective in Common Core over the next few years. So we've got to work to repeal it statewide and nationwide. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Utz?
I, too, would be opposed to Common Core and fight to repeal this unbelievable law that takes away just the common old reading, writing, and arithmetic from our local control. I've spoken with many teachers, and I've listened to some children that have been involved in some of this testing. And one, the teachers really don't know what they're teaching. They have it doesn't give a clear understanding of how it's to be presented. They're getting frustrated. The students are getting frustrated. And I think that it will hold back some of our best and brightest students, let alone the students that are struggling day to day just to get to the next grade. So you can depend that I will fight to repeal and or help correct this legislation if I go to Annapolis.
Thank you. Mrs. Scanlan.
I don't think the issue is about opposing Common Core and repealing it. I mean, that's kind of that's a non-issue. We have Common Core. Now we need to move forward and figure out how to deal with it. But I want to start with telling you what Common Core isn't, because there's been way too much controversy surrounding Common Core. Common Core is not a federal takeover of education. It's not about indoctrination of our children. Teachers are not teaching from government-issued scripts, and they're not teaching at the same pace all over the country. Parents are not isolated from their children's education. Common Core is not about data mining or using our kids as guinea pigs with creepy technology. And anyone who perpetuates these myths doesn't really understand what Common Core is. Common Core is a set of math and English standards. It's not a curriculum, it's standards. We've always had educational standards. Before that, we had No Child Left Behind. No Child Left Behind was a federal initiative. Common Core is not a federal initiative. The standards were developed by the National Governors Association Center for Best Practices and the Council of Chief State School Officers. The development of the standards was primarily funded by the Gates Foundation. The curriculum to support Common Core was developed at the local level. So students, what your students are learning in the public schools was developed by curriculum writing teams right here in Carroll County. Teachers are free to differentiate instruction to students. I think the problem with Common Core is that it was rushed. I think the testing is also problematic. I think that's where the biggest frustration has come in. And we definitely need to take a step back, take a breath, understand what Common Core is, and work to fix the problems with it.
Thank you. Our next question will start with Mrs. Krebs. The General Assembly specifically voted for Plan Maryland. What changes, if any, should be made to this strategy? And how would you introduce the changes and gain support?
Well, Plan Maryland, that was a number of years ago, and I did not support that. I voted against it because basically I believe that the counties and municipalities should determine land use policies within the jurisdictions at home through their master plan process. And Plan Maryland became top-down. Everything has to be approved by the state. And we've got people in the state that live, miles and miles away deciding land use policies here in the state of Maryland. We oppose that very stringently because local control of how you want your communities to look, your counties to look, your municipalities, that's the most important. There's so many restrictions now on whether it's septic restrictions or zoning restrictions coming from the state that Carroll County has had a difficult time even being able to grow in a modest way, and that's not healthy. Not having no growth at all it's hurting our schools. Our enrollments are dropping, and it's not healthy to be in a place that's not able to grow. I think our county does a better job, and our people in this county right back here at home making land use decisions, and I think that's where the decision belongs. I'm not sure how it's going to all play out, but I think the state getting involved in local land use policies is a wrong, bad policy, and I've pushed back on it every time we've been able to do, and I voted against it.
Thank you. Mr. Reedy?
Yeah, local zoning is really one of the fundamental sort of cornerstones of how we've developed our country in the last, really for many, many years, for many decades. There's been an assault on the ability of people locally to make their own local planning and zoning decisions from the O'Malley-Brown administration for the entire time they've been in office. They're really starting in 2007 and 8 with critical area reform, where they wanted the O'Malley administration wanted and succeeded with expanding how far into the critical areas that the state could control local development. It went from 100 feet to 500 feet. Their goal ultimately, and Plan Maryland was sort of the first step, is to really have the State Department of Environment and state planning control planning and zoning for the whole state. And I think it's a big mistake. I wasn't there. I've opposed Plan Maryland, and obviously helped fight. The rain tax is really part of that whole agenda, really, of controlling growth and limiting development. And I think ultimately, those of us that are to call ourselves conservatives and Republicans ultimately have to take a stand in favor of local zoning and local control, and I support a lot of what our commissioners have done in that regard as well.
Thank you. Mr. Shoemaker.
Plan Maryland is certainly something that we vehemently opposed here in Carroll County, and we got a fair amount of recognition for that opposition. But the problem ultimately is that Plan Maryland had and still has, I believe, the potential to usurp local control over planning decisions. And, it's outrageous to me, it's incredibly ridiculous to me that some bureaucrat sitting down in either Baltimore or Annapolis would know better than folks out here about land use in, say, Taneytown. What this really is all about, and I think it was alluded to by Delegate Reedy, is it's about the consolidation of power with the folks in Annapolis who think that they know better than we yokels do.
Thank you. Mr. Stonko.
Yeah, it seems that we all have a very common vision on Plan Maryland. Plan Maryland doesn't work, and all zoning should be left local. Most people in Carroll County are against Plan Maryland, and again, they would like to see it left local. Our county commissioners and local boards have a much better understanding of what should happen in our counties and the way that zoning should occur in our counties than the state government does. I know that local zoning works far better. We've seen it in our local towns. It's ultimately the left's goal to further urbanize our state and our country. I love Carroll County. I love how rural it is. I love the way it's designed. And again, it should be left to our county commissioners, our local boards, our local town councils, and it should ultimately always be controlled locally. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Utz?
Okay, Carroll, counties and local governments have been zapped by this Plan Maryland, and what it does restricts the planning authority and control authority of zoning to our local leaders. But yet what has happened is, and it's agreed upon, that they're trying to corral the growth around the municipalities that have the infrastructure, but yet our local infrastructure, especially in Westminster, is overburdened, overtaxed, and now we're faced with huge expenses to increase our sewer and septic systems and our water ability to serve our citizens in Westminster. It was a condition to try to control sprawl, and we understand that, but we are a county of farmers, and I think that our local commissioners have the ability to know when to control and when not to control. I would not support any further Plan Maryland legislation.
Thank you. Mrs. Scanlan.
Philosophically, Plan Maryland has some good ideas, but I think these are ideas that we all want to see where we live. We don't want to see uncontrolled growth and McMansion developments spread all over our rural county. And I'll be honest, I'm not intimately familiar with the details of Plan Maryland. And if it is, as my colleagues say, that it's a very top-down approach, well, I think that's wrong. I mean, I think there needs to be a more collaborative effort. And I definitely agree that we need to have local control of all these issues, whether it be zoning and how we use our land. And I think that we all want the same thing, that we don't want to see uncontrolled growth in Carroll County or anywhere else. And I think that the state needs to trust the local governments to make the wise decisions for their counties.
Thank you. Mrs. Amedori.
Thank you. I'm a less government, less control of my life, the better off we are kind of person. So I absolutely would be opposed to control Maryland. I believe in people having the right to determine what happens with their land. I'm not a land grabber. I don't want to take your land from you. I don't believe in eminent domain, and I don't believe in the state or the federal government coming in and telling us how we should zone our property.
Thank you. Mr. Elliott?
I too voted against Plan Maryland. It's just another example of governmental control of every part of our lives. You know, it all started, as I recall, under the Glendenning administration with smart growth. And this has just been an extension of smart growth. And I think that planning and should be controlled at the local level. I think they've done a good job for many years here, and I don't think that we need to have governmental control from the state or from the federal government in this respect. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question comes from a member of our audience, and we'll start with Mr. Stonko. And it's a very brief question. Do you support the new state initiative of a new Western Maryland?
I think this new Western Maryland is a good idea. I know there's a lot of complications to how we would get it done. I've heard that there's a move to try to get it for a non-binding ballot initiative. It's a little bit complicated. I think it would definitely benefit our county. I think our residents would love that. I can definitely support it if there would be a way to get it done. Like I said, there's a lot of tie-ups with statewide constitution and how we would do it, but if it could be done, I would definitely support it, yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Utz?
Well, I would support the split. I know that many of us here on the panel would love to be the governor of that state. But there is so many complications about this legislative effort and move to separate the state in half. First, we have to get past the Democratic control of the State House and the legislative body. So while I think it's a positive start, I think there's a lot of work to do, and hope that if there's folks that are willing to push forward, we'll do it.
Thank you. Mrs. Scanlan?
So by this question, you're referring to splitting Maryland into two separate states.
I believe that's the meaning, yes.
Yes, from Carroll County West.
I'm not really sure how to answer that. I don't support it. I don't know why we can't all work together. However, if a majority of citizens of these western counties wanted to separate and form their own state, the majority speaks. So, but I do think it would be an incredibly difficult process. I have to admit, I was not anticipating this question.
That's why we have a live studio audience today, to keep us on our toes. Mrs. Amedori?
Thank you. I love Carroll County. I love the way it is. I like that we have good commissioners. I like that we have rolling hills. But I'll tell you what I don't like. I don't like the fact that they gerrymandered Chris Van Hollen into becoming our congressman. And you know what comes with Chris Van Hollen? Union PAC money. And it's coming into our county, and it's coming into our county via these candidates sitting here today. And if you're not diligent and vigilant in what you vote for, who you vote for in this next election, Carroll County may not recover from the unions that are coming into this county, from the foothold. We are a desired commodity. We are one of the last standing soldiers. And if we don't hold tight, we're going to lose what we have, and it can happen this election. I would support an initiative if I had to move into another state, because, quite frankly, I don't like union control. I don't like the long arm of the government coming in and telling me how to live and what to do. I don't want to go to Annapolis to make more laws. I want to go to Annapolis to repeal laws. We've got too many laws. I didn't go down there when I was elected before and try to make a bunch of laws. I tried to learn what was going on and what would be best for this county. And that's why I voted for the budget when I did. I'm sure I voted for the budget more times than not. I think the one time I didn't vote for the budget was because Glenn Denning had a smart gun legislation money in there, and I wasn't going to vote for that. But if we have to secede, we have to go and split, then I'd be willing to do it.
Thank you. Mr. Elliott?
Well, I'll tell you, I understand why people would want to be looking to have that split in the state. I've often said, as a delegate here from Carroll County, that I could not understand that 50 miles away, that philosophically in Prince George's and Montgomery County, that there's unbelievable differences between the way we think. There's no question Carroll County is a conservative county, and Montgomery and Prince George's have completely 180 out many times on different issues as to how we believe, how we think. So I can understand that, why a person would want to maybe look to us separating a more conservative Western Maryland away from the rest of the state. However, I like Maryland as it is. I like the mountains that we have up in Garrett County, I like the Eastern Shore, and all that is a part of Maryland's attraction to people across the country. And of course, the rolling hills of Carroll County and Frederick County, all of that makes up an unbelievable state, a state that has so much to offer to us and to so many people coming from outside. So I don't think I would be in favor of this at all. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Krebs.
Thank you. It was an interesting thought. And I think philosophically, Western Maryland is very different from our main jurisdictions. But I don't think it would be fair to leave the Eastern Shore behind either, because really most of the counties, 20 jurisdictions in the state, really are more conservative. They're more like us. It's the three main jurisdictions that happen to have a very large population that think very differently, as Delegate Elliott said. I'm glad the person who brought it up, I'm glad they brought attention to it, because at some point we get so frustrated by having this stuff jammed down our throat all of the time. I think it was a good exercise in thought and in making a statement. Financially, I don't know how practical it would be. We wouldn't have our university system. We wouldn't be able to go in-state to our colleges where we send our kids, our Salisbury and our University of Maryland. We'd all have to go to Frostburg. So there's a lot of details I think that would have to, I like Frostburg, but I think we need to think of that. But I really appreciate the person that brought it to the attention and got national headlines on it, because it is frustrating. And I think we need to get more Republicans. We need to get more people to be Republican and have conservative principles in our state, because I think most people really are more conservative thinking and believe in personal responsibility and fiscal discipline than the votes that come out of Annapolis. So I appreciate the efforts. I don't know how practical it is, but I appreciate it in spirit what they're trying to do.
Thank you. Mr. Reedy.
Yeah, actually, as I go door to door, this is one of the things that most often gets said to me is, can't we do that Western Maryland thing? And I have to applaud Scott Strelzik and the folks that have really, at the very least, brought a lot of attention to some of the inequities that have happened in our state. You know, I love Maryland, and I ran for the House of Delegates, and I'm running for a second term because I want to fight for Maryland. I want to bring real change and reform to our state. I tell you one other thing people tell me when I go door to door is they're tired of all the wasteful spending. And so when I have an opportunity to vote either in favor or against a budget that has funding for Obamacare, rating $200 million in teacher pensions, Common Core funding, and also legislative pay raises are in that budget, which we weren't able to get a vote on the floor, that I opposed. I feel like I have to do what my constituents want. So I've actually tried to help find ways that we can get some sort of non-binding ballot initiative. It's very difficult, as Josh pointed out. But I think we ought to continue working hard to fight for change in Maryland. And so that's one of the reasons I've spent time last year going around the state on my own time and my own dime, working with Republican candidates in other parts of the state, because we need to elect more, we need more balance in the General Assembly. I think that's actually one of the critical issues as we come into the election from a political perspective, if I can put my political science sociology hat on for a minute, is really we need more balance in our state. So while I actually like the idea of a Western Maryland initiative if the people voted for it, it is difficult to accomplish. So I support it, but I don't know that it can happen. What I am committed to doing is doing everything that I can to try to turn our state around and reform it and try to make us have more balance and elect some more Republicans this fall.
Thank you. Mr. Shoemaker.
Yeah, I share in the frustration of those who've talked about forming our own state, but somebody asked me this question a few months ago, and I said, well, if you want a state that's poorer than Mississippi, I guess, maybe Western Maryland might be the thing for you. But it would have no tax base at all. But, also the problem is it would require congressional approval. There are, secession efforts in other states across the country. They're not going to go anywhere fast because it would require Congress to act. And, although I was born and raised in the great state of Maryland, my family's from North Carolina. They tried secession. It didn't work out too well for them. So.
Thank you. Our next question comes from a member of the audience, and we'll begin with Mrs. Scanlan. We often hear candidates who harp on cutting taxes, eliminating waste, et cetera, which folks like to hear. How would you plan to address meeting the needs of our state and county when partisan politics has created more bureaucracy and oftentimes depletes funding for infrastructure and education?
Thank you for that question. That is very frustrating to me, too. I mean, you can talk about wasteful spending, overburdensome regulations, restrictions on, personal rights and business rights, supporting of a nanny state, wanting fiscal responsibility and personal responsibility. I think we all want those things, but, instead of giving us sound bites, tell us exactly where the wasteful spending is. Tell us exactly what regulations are burdensome on business. Tell us exactly how we're not promoting personal responsibility and fiscal responsibility. I think we all want fiscal responsibility. It's a tremendous job. It's a very serious job that we're tasked with to spend taxpayers' money, and I think that we all, Democrats and Republicans, want to take that seriously. So I think we need to get away from the sound bites and start talking specifics. Again, where is the wasteful spending? What regulations are burdensome? How are we creating a nanny state? All right, and then when we can talk about specifics, then we can start moving forward to fix these problems.
Thank you. Mrs. Amedori.
Thank you. Maryland is addicted to spending. That's the bottom line. We had 80 tax increases over the O'Malley administration. Budget went from $29 billion when I left the General Assembly in 2004 to become a Maryland Parole Commissioner to $39 billion now. You talk about small businesses, we have to be sure that we're cutting the payroll taxes, that we're eliminating the regulations that are going to allow these small businesses to stay in business. And I know you don't want to hear this, but if we start getting union PAC money into this county, it's not going to take care of the small businesses. Your businesses are not going to grow. They want Carroll County. They don't want the rural beauty that we have. They don't want a conservative county. You can sit here and you can listen to your current delegation talk about their conservative voting record. 90% of the time, they voted with the House Speaker. 90%. So what you're hearing is a small 10% on their conservative vote. And again, I ask you to think about this. If it's such a conservative vote, why the active solicitation to bring Democrat supporters into the Republican primary?
Thank you. Mr. Elliott.
Over the past 10 years, under the O'Malley administration, we have increased our budget by some $10 billion. And I think that what we must understand, in fact, in the last session of the General Assembly, most of us here supported a bill. It was a House Bill, let's see, I got it here. House Bill 326, Income Tax Relief Act of 2014. And what that would have done was cut the income taxes by some 10%. This didn't go anywhere. But we must understand that by decreasing your taxes, what you do is you improve upon the people's ability to be able to consume more goods, and in the consumption of more goods, we improve on the revenue for the state, and that's the way to go. We don't need any more taxes. We need to cut the income tax, for example, and then by cutting that tax, we must understand that we must recognize that corporations and such that will produce more jobs, and then in return, consumers will be able to purchase more, and by purchasing more, we'll have more monies in the revenues, in the state revenues. And that's the way to go. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Krebs.
Thank you. You talked about education funding and bringing back funding to Carroll County. There's been a lot of misinformation about education funding. Education funding is funded by a very complex formula called the Thornton formula, and it was devised in 2002 in the Glendenning administration. That is how education funding is brought to us. No legislator has anything to do with education funding. There is a committee that's going to look at this formula because it's very complicated and it's become very complex. And certain counties like our county have been negatively impacted because of our declining enrollments. And that's something that we have never had before. The last 5 years, we've lost a number of students, and we're going to lose more in the next 5 years. And it's significantly hurt our school budget. That is not really accounted for in this Thornton formula. So they're going to look at the formula to revisit it. Also, it has to do with relative wealth of your county that's hurt us, and that's why we're losing funding. It's been anticipated, it's been in the formula, and has nothing to do with any legislator sitting here or that will sit here. And if they tell you any different, they don't know what they're talking about. There are the small projects that you could get if you vote for the budget. I call them bribe, and I call them earmarks, and they're small potatoes. You might get an extra $100,000 for a little pork project if you vote for the governor's budget. I will not sell my soul for $100,000. I'm not going to sell my principles for I don't know what, but that's not going to happen from me. If you would like someone to vote for the budget, O'Malley's budget, and all this stuff we've talked about, pick someone else, because I'm not going to do that. One of the problems we have in increasing the budget, we have increased, we call it the nanny state. We have increase in food stamps, housing, Medicaid, unwed mothers, and the biggest problem we've got in the state of Maryland is the breakdown of the two-parent family. There's a direct nexus between that and the reliance on all of these, I call it the welfare state. So I think that we need to have policies that encourage families and reward work, and that's something that we've all done, is put in those type of policies that you would be benefited from rewarding those type of activities versus rewarding bad behavior.
Thank you.
Steve, I wonder if you could repeat the question. I have some answers, but I want to be sure they match up.
Certainly. We often hear candidates who harp on cutting taxes, eliminating waste, which people like to hear. How would you plan to address meeting the needs of our state and county when partisan politics have created more bureaucracy and oftentimes depletes funding for infrastructure and education?
Well, I'll tell you what, I thought actually Dorothy raised some good questions about, you do hear, and this was frustrating for me, a lot of times you hear, particularly Republicans, talk about waste and fraud and abuse and wasteful spending. And sometimes they're challenged to offer specifics and they kind of eyes glaze over. Well, I thought I would offer a few. An example, I don't know if it's partisan politics because one party's in charge, so it's kind of at their doorstep, but we do have some specific examples. I'd be willing to vote for a budget if it was reasonable, if it only increased as it's needed to by a small percentage. We've had budgets that have gone up, billions of dollars. Our Republican caucus, which I'm part of the leadership of in the House, we offered amendments to just keep the budget spending to a 1% increase, which is a little bit below inflation, so actually reducing government. We actually worked our proposal as a way that you wouldn't have to raid teacher pension funds, and I supported that budget amendment on the floor. It was defeated along most basically partisan lines. Some specific examples of wasteful spending in our current state budget process, and this is not just this year, it's been the last few years, but the last couple of years in some cases, there are nearly 500 vacant positions in state government that are fully funded. And that's after you account for some vacant positions that are because of turnover. You certainly have a certain amount of turnover, but departments like MDE and Department of Planning and lots of other departments, general services, they have up to it's not quite 500 vacant positions, fully funded. If those folks make an average of $50,000 a year, that's well over $70 million. We have $140 million in this last budget in Obamacare funding for a website that doesn't work, that I did not vote for. It was established in 2012 in a bill I voted against. We could have gone to the federal site, which isn't working that great, but at least we wouldn't have to pay twice for it. There's some other examples, but there are some specific ways that we could reduce waste and having the money we need for our key priorities like education and building roads. I didn't get to the 30% in administration in our Maryland Department of Transportation that doesn't go to roads or mass transit.
Thank you. Mr. Shoemaker.
Yeah, at the county level, I've said on a number of occasions that government should do a few things and do them well. We should educate our kids, should provide infrastructure to drive on, and public safety, and that's pretty much it. Government gets into trouble when it tries to do too much. When government tries to coddle us from cradle to grave, we have problems. And that's why we have the problems that we have in Annapolis. And I think at some point we have to reach across the aisle and convince the majority party of the ill effects of the consequences of the actions they've taken, the heightened regulatory burden and the tax burden that's placed on our businesses and our people in this state. And frankly, it's clear that Annapolis has a spending problem, not a revenue problem. In fact, Annapolis is the only place where you can cut the rate of increase in spending and call that a spending cut. You couldn't do that in Carroll County. And if you want to know the impact, I mean, I alluded to them in my opening. You know, the lost taxpayers to other states, the lost businesses to other states, and the 47% of the populace who would like to leave. What's the solution? Well, it's very simple. Ronald Reagan had a great solution for it. You cut taxes, and by doing so, you cut, and I would suggest specifically rolling back the income tax and the tax on pension, you'll increase revenue.
Thank you. Mr. Stonko.
Sure. First, let's clear something up. There is no misinformation being given on this education funding by us challengers. Delegate Krebs seems confused by the specific situation. Senator Getty worked to carve out specific funding in this Senate budget that was hold harmless in $3.1 million for this year and next year, and $5 million over 3 years. The delegation chose not to vote to hold the education funding, and they decided not to protect it. Had they decided to vote for the budget, Carroll County would have received the money. It's that simple. Ending wasteful spending practices is key to getting our state back on track. That's because lower spending means lower taxes. We can put more money back into the wallets and pockets of our citizens. They can choose to spend the money how they want to because everyone knows we can spend our money better than our government can. There's been ridiculous situations in the last couple of years where spending has gone to things that even the Democrats that have supported have already said that they wouldn't work. One example is the wind energy program that was established in Delaware. Not only was the money left out of Maryland, but the environmental lobby, before the bill passed, said that the wind energy program wouldn't work. They chose to run it anyway for Governor O'Malley's presidential ambitions. We need real spending reform and need to stop seeing a waste of taxpayer dollars. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Utz.
And I don't disagree that Annapolis and the state of Maryland is out of control in their spending. But I can tell you is easier said than done. We are a minority party to this great state, and the only way I see us doing what everyone else on the panel has said, trying to cut taxes, trying to lower the corporate income, rates, is we need to walk across the aisle. We need to be able to start changing minds of our, if nothing else, our just left of center constituents in Annapolis. That's the only way I see it. We are not going to make it any other way. I can tell you I have worked with the Maryland Municipal League. We have sat down with Senate President and House Speaker over and over about highway user funds and all of the other things that are important to our local community. And after we leave the meeting, it all changes back to, okay, we're not going to do that. So we have to be able to be willing to walk across the aisle and make something happen. And I am willing to do that. I'm a leader, and I can take care of that.
Thank you. We have time for 2 more questions. The next question will start with Mr. Elliott. This has to do with our legislators. In the past, Carroll County has had one united delegation of senators and House delegates, and now there seems to be a split. What specific steps will you take to unite the Carroll delegation and provide a single voice for us in Annapolis?
Well, there have been some changes in the delegation, no question of that. And I think one of the things that we could do is to meet as both Senate and House delegations together. We should vote on the agenda for the commissioners together. We should have one meeting for the public where both the senators and the House members have that meeting together with the public. That would be so much better, I think, in reaching consensus between the two chambers. You know, I was on the Howard County delegation for several years, and we did meet just that way. We had the Howard County senators met with the House delegates, and we would vote on various agenda items of the commissioners or the councilmen or the council down there in Howard County. And if any one of the issues there was a problem in respect to the Senate delegation, then they had the power to overrule anything that the House might have approved in respect to votes on particular issues. But that was done, and rarely did they ever, quite frankly, rarely did the senators ever disagree with the House members. So it worked out fine. But I think what's happening here is that we have this divorcement, as I call it, a divorcement between the two chambers that I think is really unnecessary. And I think it would be to the advantage of Carroll County if we get together and meet the ways that I just enumerated. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Krebs.
Thank you. We were sort of shocked when we heard that the Senate decided to split from the House 4 years ago. We didn't find out about it for 3 months, and I think the county commissioners told us about it. We had no idea that there was this split. And I think we've seen that there's been a philosophical divide with our senators, and that's been a problem. Whether it's voting for the budget, whether it's them voting for the rain tax, whether it's them voting for same-sex marriage, whether it's them voting for the transgender bathroom bill, whether it's them voting and sponsoring the pension shift to the counties, whether it's them not putting in the legislation requested by the commissioners to help with the rain tax and get the solution that we got. We philosophically have a very big divide between our Senate and our House. House members have never criticized them for those votes, but they've started criticizing us publicly in the newspaper through a letter writing campaign, and that's made it difficult to work with them. So I think that is going to change in the next election. We're going to have more people involved, and more people, I think, will be siding with us in our conservative values. More people will be voting the conservative mantra that we were sent down there to do. The example of the rain tax. We were asked to put a bill in to find a solution for the rain tax. Our county commissioners asked us to do it. The House members worked for 2 years on that with the county commissioners and their staff, and we got a solution. Our senators didn't even bother to put the legislation in. And then at the last minute, on the last night of session, they said they put a budget amendment in that was meaningless. It lasts 1 year, and it says they may do this. And it really did nothing, just to say that they did something. So we do have a problem with, getting the work done, working with our commissioners as they've asked us to do. And we have a philosophical divide just on issues. And like I said, we've never criticized them for their votes, but they've been very critical of us in our no vote for the budget. We also, on the education funding, the governor told us he was not going to put the money in the budget. And Mr. Stonko, you've been given bad information because the governor's budget secretary said there was no plan to put any money in the budget. Senator Getty got the money in last year, and the governor didn't fund it. And the governor wasn't going to fund it again this year. So we have different people that we talk to, and we worked very hard to get that money, but it wasn't going to be in the budget.
Mr. Reedy.
Historically, actually, and this is something I worked as a staff person in the General Assembly for 4 years when I was just out of college, and our delegation in Carroll County always met jointly, but technically you have a Senate and a House delegation even when you meet jointly. It was never really recognized that way, I think, locally. I think we should meet together, and I think we're going to work to be sure we do that in the future. Until recently, I don't necessarily agree that it was a philosophical divide on most issues. I think both chambers work differently. There are different processes in both chambers. Obviously, on the budget, clearly we did have a philosophical difference. That vote on the budget was a very hard decision. I really spent a lot of time, I talked to a lot of people on both sides about whether I felt like it was right for me to vote in favor or against that budget. And what I decided was I had voted against the O'Malley budget that had many of the same problems with it for 3 years. Would it be right for me for something that would not be a lot of money, would not help us a great deal, tiny amount of money compared to what was being taken from teacher pensions and done to our taxpayers. Should I vote for the budget or not? And ultimately, I just felt like it wasn't actually political. I could have voted either way. I don't think I would have had a problem. Might have had an easier forum tonight if I'd voted for the budget. But you know, I felt like it was the right thing for me to do. And I don't cast aspersions about anybody's vote. And I'm not saying I would never vote for a budget. I think it would depend on what was in the budget. You know, and if you know, it might even depend on what was at stake. But in this case, you know, I felt like I made the right decision, and I was disappointed to be attacked by that, and to sort of I was disappointed by that. I'm hoping that I think we do need to work together closely, and I think that we can. And on most issues locally, we had been able in the past too, and I'm hoping that we can again. And I think certainly we need to work together and also recognize the differences in the two chambers. They work differently too. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Shoemaker.
The legislators from Carroll County seem to have accomplished more for the folks back home when we had a unified delegation, I believe. This business of having a House delegation and a Senate delegation really hasn't been that productive, and it's become apparent that the two groups aren't really communicating well and are sometimes working at cross purposes with one another. I think we need to reunify the two into one stronger unit that communicates with one another and strategizes with one another, and then maybe perhaps we'll be able to get the gaming bill through to benefit our fire departments and nonprofits.
Thank you. Mr. Stonko.
To get back to education funding really quick, we just heard two completely different opinions from Delegate Reedy and Delegate Krebs. Delegate Reedy just said that he almost voted for the budget to protect the education funding. Delegate Krebs claimed that it wasn't there. So they can't be both situations. So let's figure that out first. All right, to talk about the issue of joint delegation, entrenched incumbency by several members of our Carroll County House delegation has created this unnecessary issue. While the Senate delegation members have been successful with their approach to local issues, the nonprofit issue of the volunteer fire departments, education funding for Carroll County, and the rain tax and leaving it out, giving us protection in the long term, the House delegation has been ineffective at getting results for Carroll County. This election is about the future of Carroll County and the direction that the voters want to go in. I believe our House delegation needs to change. Replacing career politicians with new representatives that are focused on Carroll County is important to creating a strong delegation. In order to create a more productive delegation, I will advocate for one combined local delegation that includes all the state senators and state delegates that represent Carroll County and Annapolis. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Utz?
Remember when I said it was easier said than done? This is a fine example. Here we are, all Carroll Countyans, all trying to get representation for you to Annapolis, and we can't even get our delegation together to support local bills. I find this very appalling, and this is exactly why you need a change going to Annapolis. You need great leaders that understand everyone's position, compromise, and move forward. This is a game that's being played of ideology and power, and it needs to stop if you, the folks, are going to be represented in Annapolis. Thanks.
Thank you. Mrs. Scanlan.
Thank you. Mr. Utz, I don't know if I can do much better than what you just said. I completely agree with you. It's common knowledge that our delegation doesn't get along. Why that is, I don't know. But a perfect example of that is the budget, how it was voted against, and we lost education funding. There's emails from everyone blaming the other for why we didn't get the education funding. I mean, who's right? Every problem between two human beings or groups of human beings boils down to communication, or more specifically, lack thereof. We need to take a deep breath and start talking to each other. Our delegation in Annapolis needs to present a unified front, and maybe in the 2015 session, we can finally get the casino bill passed so that our local fire companies can start doing fundraisers and bring respect back to Carroll County again. It's the only way.
Thank you. Mrs. Amedori.
Thank you. These philosophical differences did not start last year or the year before. There were no philosophical differences when Senator Haynes was in office and this House delegation decided that they were going to buck everything that Senator Haynes wanted to do. Senator Haynes, time and time again, tried to stop a transfer tax, but it was your House delegation that supported the transfer tax. Time and time again, it was your senators, your current Senate delegation, that for 4 years has passed the gaming bill. And for 4 years, it has not passed the House. And the reason it has not passed the House is because there's no respect for your House delegation. Your House delegation stood up on the floor and slaughtered, demeaned, tore down the floor leader on O'Malley's slots bill. Now, you can't demean and tear down and talk condescending to a floor leader on a slots bill and then come back the same year or a year later and say, oh, but by the way, can we have our own gaming bill? The Democrats are on to that. They're not going to take that. There is a way to talk to them. There's a way to handle things, and it's with decorum and diplomacy. And your House delegation has become complacent and incompetent, and they don't know how to get the work done.
Thank you. And our final question tonight before closing statements, we'll start with Mr. Shoemaker. The art of consensus building is an important skill for legislators. Tell us about a time when you needed to build consensus to achieve your goals and were successful.
Well, I mean, I guess I could give you a whole host of stories about building consensus. I mean, it hasn't been easy over the last 4 years. But we've managed to forge a consensus to get things done in the best interests of the majority of folks in Carroll County. And I'm talking about specifically reaching out to find a third vote to pass a budget that makes sense, that fully funds education, that takes care of our nonprofits, that provides adequate funding for ag preservation and a whole host of other things, while at the same time providing for tax relief for the folks. And that's something that we've been able to do, forge a consensus to formulate a budget that accomplishes those things in each of the 4 years that I've been in office at the county level. And I can tell you, working with that group, if I can, have that kind of success with those diverse perspectives, I think that I'll be well suited to accomplish the same type of thing in Annapolis.
Thank you. Mr. Stonko.
Building consensus is something that my family and I do every day with our small business. We have to work together and reach out to other communities and organizations in order to get contracts done and understand exactly what we're going to do going forward. We have to be on the same page in order to get these things done and manage the business so that it goes smoothly every day and we don't run into hiccups. That's the key to having a successful business at home, a business in Carroll County, and being a successful legislator in Annapolis. That's what we need down there, and that's what we don't have right now. We don't have people that can work together. We have people that are criticizing nonstop about issues between the House and Senate delegation that were basically them choosing to divide each other up. It kind of goes back to the question you had just asked before, but we really need people that are going to work down there and work cohesively with the Senate delegation, work together with each other in the House delegation to accomplish good things for Carroll County. And that's what I want to do. I want to get down there and accomplish good things for Carroll County. We have things that have taken so long to get through in Annapolis. The Volunteer Fire Department's nonprofit gaming bill. The ARC of Carroll County lost out on the funding they needed to do the repairs on their facilities this year for our mentally disabled. We have a lot of issues that Carroll Countyans are focused on, but our House delegation is ignoring. We need people that are going to work with each other to accomplish significant goals for Carroll County. I plan to do that, and I ask for your vote on June 24th.
Thank you. Mr. Utz.
I agree. This is a question similar to the last one where we have to build consensus among ourselves as leaders that are going to represent you in Annapolis. And just some examples of how I've been able to build consensus, and it's not just me, but a group of people espousing the mayors of Carroll County, working long and hard with each other, trying to come up with a solution to this rain tax bill that have caused all of us to realize a big increase in tax issues, including how much it's going to cost for our stormwater management fees. And the mayors were instrumental, along with our staffs, the county level and the city level, to come up with a solution that all could agree to. And I tell you, it didn't come easy. It came with a lot of, what do you want to call it, Haven? Backs talking and slapping each other. But it happened. And Carroll Countyans can do it. It just takes good leaders, great leaders, to do this. I worked along with the Maryland Municipal League to fiercely get our highway user funds back in this county and in our municipalities. It takes a lot of time, a lot of energy, but again, with good leadership and cooperation and consensus building is how it all happens. Thanks.
Thank you. Mrs. Scanlan.
If you want to talk consensus building, try spending a day in a classroom. This is one of the skills that teachers use. When you are faced with 30 students of varying degrees of skill, trying to keep them all interested and engaged in what you're trying to teach them, trying to decide which battles to fight and which battles to back off from, that takes consensus building to a fine art. So I've had plenty of practice with consensus building in the classroom, having been a classroom teacher and a teacher librarian. As a volunteer coordinator, I'm the volunteer coordinator for Common Ground. This means that I deal with almost 200 volunteers who I place in various positions to help support Common Ground's initiatives in the summer. So you're dealing with 200 different personality types, trying to keep those volunteers happy so that they'll come back next year and volunteer for you. Making exceptions in certain cases, it can't be all black and white. Sometimes you have to bend the rules. So keeping 200 volunteers happy, keeping students in a classroom interested and engaged and willing to work for you, that is consensus building. And I would definitely take that to Annapolis with me. I am open-minded. I want to work with my Republican colleagues. I want to bring a new era to Carroll County with respect to our delegation. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Amedori.
Thank you. I'm sure my 90-year-old father would tell you that I cannot build consensus with anybody. And for the past 6 years, I was on the Maryland Parole Commission, and there wasn't a whole lot of consensus building to be done to be able to sit and look a felon in the eye and tell them they were denied or a release because they used a gun and or left a victim in their wake. When I reach back into my legislative days, I did consensus building. I was a part of the Women's Caucus. I reached out to them. I was also friendly and had good rapport with the Black Caucus. I had great rapport with the committee leaders, the chair people. My chairman on the Judiciary Committee, where I sat for 6 years and was the front line on the Second Amendment issues. And I built consensus. I was the ranking member in the Judiciary Committee. I was the assistant minority leader. And so I built consensus among the diversity of the Republicans within our caucus. And that takes a lot. Sometimes that's like herding cats. So much to the surprise of my 90-year-old dad, I can build consensus, and I have.
Thank you. Mr. Elliott.
When I think of consensus, I think of all the bills that come into the legislature, some 3,000 of them. And when they come in, there's not a one of them hardly that will go out, if it's approved, will go out written the same way as it came in. There's a certain amount of compromise and consensus goes in every one of those bills. And that compromise and consensus is within the committees, within the General Assembly itself. And for example, in my case, when I learned that certain small businesses didn't have the same opportunity to get their property tax paid in increments, I put in a bill that would do that. But with a lot of my bills, it takes a couple years. It takes a couple years because over those 2 years, you're developing a lot of compromise and consensus in order to get a work product that's agreeable and passes the General Assembly. And to me, consensus is the name of the game there, and it is for every bill that comes to the General Assembly. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Krebs?
Thank you. First, I just want to mention the gaming bill. There's been, I think people have some history that they forget. Gaming bill was put in 6 years ago when it was first requested by our volunteer services organization. It passed the House the very first year that they asked for it. Senator Haynes was philosophically opposed to gaming from his religious beliefs. Even though no one else in the county ever came up and opposed the bill, he killed it in the Senate 2 years in a row when we passed it. So we would have had gaming 6 years ago if we had had cooperation, but we had a philosophical divide there. So the House was very successful, and we passed the gaming bill this year in the House. And in between that period of time, there was something called casino gambling, and there was a little bit of testosterone between the Senate President and the House Speaker, and it wasn't about Carroll County. It was all counties that requested local gaming. They did not pass any of their legislation. So this is not directed to us and being inefficient and whatever. Just a little historical background on that. So they did every single bill, local bill, that was requested this year passed the House delegation. Every bill, including the gaming bill. And it got stuck on the Senate President's desk for whatever reason, and we can debate that ad nauseum. We serve on the Health and Government Operations Committee, and we have consensus on almost everything we do in our committee. We are very well respected in our committee, and we always have a seat at the table. The rain tax is a perfect example of consensus building. The county commissioners in our county do a very good job with stormwater management. We went down to the state. We sat with the committee chairman. This House delegation, our senators were not involved in this negotiation, although they refused to participate. But with our county staff, we had 4 meetings with the committee chair and the Maryland Department of the Environment, and we told them how well we do in Carroll County, and they respected us enough to go to bat. We had an Attorney General's opinion saying that what we want to do makes us compliant. And Carroll County now has no rain tax because of consensus building, working with the state, working with committee chairman, and working with our local county commissioners. I call that consensus building. One last thing, no one at this table cares more about education funding than me.
Thank you, Mrs. Krebs. And Mr. Reedy.
Thank you. I've had several examples, been able to pass legislation both as lead sponsor and as a co-sponsor who worked on the bills. Had some success doing that on a lot of real technical issues that involve bringing parties to the table. But I want to talk about some consensus building that I did in 2011. Actually, all 3 of us did. We were on the committee, Health and Government Operations. In 2011, I had just been elected, and Anthony Brown came in to present legislation that would set up the health care exchange, the Obamacare required health care exchange. As it came in, the bill would have set up an entirely state cabinet level agency, would have probably resulted in a tax that would have been charged every Marylander on their premiums to pay for the exchange. A cigarette tax was in play. There was no provision for private insurance brokers to sell through the exchange. There's a lot of issues with it, not the least of which was its government-run health care, which I opposed. Obviously, you start there. But there was an insistence that they were going to pass legislation to put this through. We went to our chairman, the Republicans on the committee, and we presented a list of 10 things that we felt were very wrong with the bill. What we were able to do, working with our chairman, our Democratic chairman, was turn the bill into a study task force bill. Very clearly in the bill, and I wish I had more time because it is technical, but in the bill we stripped out a number of things. We set it up as a task force where they had to report back to us in a year. In the bill on page 36, line 14, it specifically says that nothing can take place with the health care exchange. It cannot be funded, it cannot be started until there's an affirmative vote of the General Assembly in 2012. The other thing they were going to do was say, see you later, and not come back for any oversight. So when it came back, we obviously hoped the Supreme Court would rule in our favor during that time. When it came back in 2012, we voted against the bill that established the healthcare exchange. Now, the title didn't change, so the 2011 bill still says healthcare exchange. People can quibble with whether we should have voted against that or not, but we felt it was important, and I felt it was important, even though I totally oppose Obamacare, to engage in the process and build
Mr. Reed.
consensus.
It's now time for summary statements. At the beginning of the forum, I said that we had 3 minutes for summary statements, but I was given a note that we're going to cut that down to 2 because of time. So we'll have 2 minutes for summary statements. We started opening statements up here. I'd like to start at the other end of the table with Mr. Utz with your summary statement.
I'm usually last in school, so. Well, as you heard, there are many different views on how we can represent you in Annapolis. What I would like to do is tell you that I am a leader. I've been a leader since I have been involved in the state police, fire service, being the representative of my people in Westminster and being the mayor. I know how to get consensus done among all people. It isn't easy, it's hard, and it can take time. But my goal for me representing you in Annapolis is to bring home funding for our school and community charities that are desperately needed. We must fight and work to get wasteful spending stopped in the state of Maryland. We know that spending is way out of control, and we have to work with our partners on the other side of the aisle to do that. There's a way that unfunded mandates can be slowed down or even stopped, and that is we need to just go to the governor's secretaries and let them know how bad all these unfunded regulatory stipulations and laws are affecting each of our local municipalities and our counties. We have the finest example of how this rain tax has and would have killed each of us as taxpayers. I'm Kevin Utz. I'm asking for your vote on June 24th for representation in Annapolis as your delegate. I thank you for this time, and I appreciate everyone viewing tonight and in the audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Utz. Mr. Stonko.
Thank you all for attending, first of all, and participating in the political process. With this June primary, I know a lot of people aren't as checked in as usual with the election, and it's so important. You heard a lot from our House members tonight and their claims for their conservative votes, but look at their records. They've attacked our senators, so go to the senators and ask them for their side of the story. June 24th is about the future of Carroll County. It's about positive, common sense, conservative solutions that help our county. This election is about our incumbent delegates' votes for Obamacare, and they've claimed that they voted for Obamacare because they could make it better for Carroll County, despite their opposition to it. But they also chose to vote against a budget that was going to pass anyway that could have been made better for Carroll County, so they don't follow the same idea all the way through. This election is about our education system and our students. I'll stand up for our students. They have not. This election is about our nonprofits, like the ARC of Carroll County and our fire departments. I'll stand up for them. They have not. This election is about our homeowners and our business owners, town residents, farmers, and the rain tax. They haven't stood up for them. I will. I offer solutions and a consistent conservative approach to local and statewide issues. This election is about you, each and every one of you, protecting your rights, protecting your property, protecting your students' education, and protecting your wallets. Again, I thank you all for attending. And June 24th is an extremely important day for this county. I humbly ask for your vote and would appreciate any support you could give me. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Shoemaker.
Well, thank you all for staying so late. You know, the classic definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. And, you know, one could argue that sending the same folks to Annapolis every 4 years fits that definition too. Yeah, I believe it's time for a change of pace. My candidacy is one that represents a proven track record of success, both at the municipal level and at the county level. I voted to cut taxes 4 years in a row as county commissioner. We've reduced debt at the county level. We've streamlined government, and we have a workforce now that's the lowest per capita of any county in the state. We've stood up for folks' Second Amendment rights. And as a matter of fact, we stood diligent and fought the stupid, silly, idiotic rain tax that came down from Annapolis. And on another issue that I feel very strongly about, we imposed term limits. Now, while it's unlikely that the legislature will impose term limits on themselves, I've taken a pledge to serve no more than 2 terms. See, I believe everybody should have term limits from dog catcher on up. And if I can't get it done in 8 years, then I should be on my way. We have to restore Maryland's competitive advantage. We have to alleviate the tax burden on our folks. You send me to Annapolis, we'll work to do that. But I can only do it with your help. So I'd ask for your vote on June 24th. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Reedy.
Thank you. Appreciate you all being here tonight. To those that are watching, I just want to thank you also for tuning in, and those that are watching in the future, if you catch up on it later when it's replayed. I was listening to a song when I came over here. I like the band Switchfoot. I'm not sure if that's going to reach my audience right now or not, but that's my favorite band. And they have a song out now called Love Alone is Worth the Fight. And I love Maryland, and I love Carroll County. And the things that I've done for 4 years, I've fought to try to make our state and our county a place where families can afford to live, retirees can afford to live also, and businesses can grow and thrive. It's difficult in Annapolis, but I believe that we should be offering a platform of not pale pastels, but bold colors. We've heard from some Ronald Reagan quotes tonight, and I believe in bold colors. Of course, Ronald Reagan was willing to work behind the scenes and make deals when necessary. One thing that's been a hallmark, I believe, I've tried to do this for 4 years. I've always treated everybody that I've come in contact with dignity and respect. I haven't always agreed. And that's one thing you can count on me to continue to do, is even the people up here, obviously we've had some sharp exchanges, but I respect people, and I care about what people think, and I care about working for people. I'm going to do something right now that's very dangerous. I'm going to give you my personal cell phone number. And I want you, if you have questions, whether you're watching or you're here tonight, if you have any questions or concerns, if you thought that I love Delegate Reedy and all these mean things are being said about him, or just if you're curious about what the, I hope that's what it is, by the way, that you love me, but anything that you have a question about before you vote, 443-974-2079. I want to ask for your vote in the upcoming June 24th Republican primary, and I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Krebs.
Thank you. I guess I should address the old union PAC contributions. I don't believe that I've ever received a union contribution, ever. If I have, I don't know about it. So I'm not sure if maybe they're looking at the wrong campaign finance report. In fact, I've been heavily supported by Associated Builders and Contractors every single year that I've been in the legislature, which is the right to work non-union shop of our contractors. So if you look at my campaign finance reports, you will see that on there because they strongly support me. I've opposed every collective bargaining bill that has been in front of the legislature. I was the lead sponsor to save our county school system money for prevailing wage. So I am a huge right to work proponent, and you will see if you look at my campaign finance report that there is none of it on there from any union. I've never received. I also did not receive the FOP endorsement that some folks up here received, which they are a union. And I respect the FOP, don't get me wrong, but I also did not get that endorsement. So my voting record, my true voting record, has earned me endorsements from the NRA, Maryland Right to Life, the National Federation of Independent Business, and they've endorsed me for every election that I have run in. I've received a 100% rating from the Maryland Business for Responsive Government, and I received the John Shaw Award for my efforts with the business community. So I don't think I'd get those endorsements if I was in bed with the union. So I'm not sure, again, maybe they looked at the wrong name. Maybe there's another Susan Krebs campaign report. I'm the House Minority Whip. I'm the chair of the Carroll County delegation. We have a delegation that works wonderfully together, and we are very well respected. And we do appreciate other people's points of view. And it's bad enough to fight philosophical differences down in Annapolis, but it's worse when you have to come home on your own turf and fight philosophical difference. So hopefully in our next election, we will have a group of people that we can all work together. We work together very well right now. And this election is important. We need experienced, proven leaders in Annapolis, and citizens need to do their homework and get out and vote. I'd be honored if you'd consider voting for Susan Krebs on June 24th.
Thank you, Mrs. Krebs. Mr. Elliott.
As your delegate to the General Assembly, first and foremost, I was elected to serve the interests of my district and the state of Maryland. I should be prepared to serve my individual constituents in a timely fashion, and if necessary, draft legislation to address their concerns. For example, when I became aware that small business did not have the same ability as individuals to pay their property taxes in increments, I succeeded in expanding the law to include small business. When I became aware that persons falsely accused of child abuse did not have constitutional due process, I succeeded in obtaining legislation to assure due process. When I became aware that the town of New Windsor was faced with $4.5 million debt for the EPA-mandated upgrade of their wastewater treatment facility, I obtained $2.5 million after efforts to receive grant assistance failed. And then in a follow-up to that legislation, I succeeded in requiring equitable grant assistance to minor wastewater treatment facilities as is granted to major facilities, and that bill was signed by the governor just on Monday. I take constituent duties seriously, and over the years have shared the joy of the constituents I've helped to deal with the state government bureaucracy. I am grateful serving the people of Carroll County and would be most appreciative of your vote of confidence in the Republican primary on June the 24th. This will assure your continued conservative voice in Annapolis. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Amedori.
Thank you. My name is Carmen Amedori, and I would like to vote on June 24th. The current delegation has a very difficult time getting things done in Annapolis. They have not gotten the gaming bill passed. They did not bring home the money for education. They do not get along with the Senate delegation. When you look at the way things evolve, if you can't get along with your own delegation, how can you expect to do anything or bring anything back to Carroll County from Annapolis? I have a history of being a victim's rights advocate. I know that my time in the General Assembly was well spent. I accomplished a lot of things while I was down there, even stopping bad legislation, and that's one of the best things that you have going for you is stopping the bad legislation that tries to come through. There is a lot of union PAC money in these campaigns. Now I have copies if you want it. I could not extrapolate Delegate Krebs because her report was not done as nicely as Delegate Reedy's. We are not being mean to this delegation. We are only laying out the facts. These are facts. I've got the numbers, I've got the figures, I've got the votes for the Obamacare from the delegation. I would like to have you vote. I humbly ask for it, and I hope you all have a good night.
Thank you. And Mrs. Scanlan.
Well, I'm really sorry we didn't get a chance to talk about bringing jobs
Yeah, me too.
and economic growth and supporting small businesses, which are the backbones of our communities. So I really would have liked to speak on that. A couple of things before I get into my closing speech. Regarding the so-called rain tax, which is the stormwater management fee, I actually agree that this would have been a perfect opportunity not to just slap a fee on the counties. I mean, that's just antagonistic. Here was an opportunity where we could have worked together and figured out a way to meet these mandates without having to add extra taxes and fees to do so. And That's what happened here in Carroll County, and I think that's terrific. Also, Democrats don't hold, raising taxes is not a Democratic domain. Under Governor Ehrlich, he raised taxes and fees more than any prior administration 25 years before him. His budget went up $3 billion during his term. O'Malley, during his first 4 years, his budget went up $3.6 billion. So, Democrats don't have the domain on raising taxes. We don't want to see taxes raised. We want to be responsible stewards of our tax dollars. It's time to elect a public servant who realizes that compromise is a respectful way to air differences and come to mutual agreement. It is time to elect a public servant who will bring respect to Carroll County. I will bring an open-minded perspective to Annapolis. What I will not bring is a personal or political agenda. I know how to work with people, and I understand the wisdom of compromise in order to benefit the common good, like education. It's time to look beyond the D or R behind someone's name and do away with the associated stereotypes. Look at what each candidate is saying. Citizens deserve to have representatives that will give suggestions, not sound bites.
Thank you, Mrs.
Thank you.
Scanlan.
Well, it's been an interesting evening, and I really thank all of the candidates for sharing their thoughts, and I too wish we had gotten into how we would increase the economic activity within the county. I guess that perhaps that would be a good question for me to write up and send to you and ask you to comment on. The Community Media Center has been very gracious and will post the answers to additional questions from our candidates on their website. Carroll County Times has been wonderful at giving information and posting answers to questions that were posed by the Times. WTTR has been very supportive and will be rebroadcasting, as will Channel 19. This particular forum, they have been amazing community partners, and Carroll County League of Women Voters is in tremendous respect for all of them. So I think we're really, really very fortunate. I think we're fortunate that we could come to the Scott Center here at the community college for our evening together. I want to thank all of the candidates for giving up their time and for caring enough to run. I mean, I think that's a pretty big deal. And Mr. Johnson, what can I say? You're a good person and you are a wonderful moderator, and I thank you very much. So I hope you all have a good travel home and that you get your community to take advantage of the fact that this information is available. The rebroadcast on Channel 19. Please tell your family, have your neighbors watch. Read the Times. Get out there on June and vote. Okay? Have a good night.